Do you struggle to figure out what to read next? Do you have too many books to pick from? Are you suffering from anxiety because of all these books and they're just getting to you? You're in the right place then today. Welcome to Fantasy for the Ages. I'm the father, Jim. I do this show with my son, Zach, and sometimes guests, and I've got one of those to bring on in just a moment here today. This channel is the place for all things fantasy, science fiction, horror, and other nerdy things. We talk books, movies, TV shows, cons, whatever we feel like, and we hope you have some fun with us today. If you do, I want to remind you right away, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't done so. Check out our channel. There's well over 1,000 videos now that you can poke around, and there's pretty much something for everybody. But today, we're going to talk about TBRs, a to-be-read list. And let me bring my guest in here before I get any farther and see who we have today. So Derek is with us, and Derek has been on the show before. Remind them, when were you here before?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think most recently we talked about Dune.
Absolutely.
And then, man, what did we do? We also, it was way back when we talked about Wheel of Time, I believe, also at some point. And
Yep.
I think most recently you were on our show when we covered the massive ending of Memories of Ice. So
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've had some fun doing some things together here. You mentioned your show, which I think is an absolutely awesome show and quite the endeavor that you and your co-host are on. Tell us a little bit about that for anybody who hasn't met you before.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll introduce myself. My name's Derek. I am one half of the show that my best friend Justin and I do. Our show is called D&J's Epic Quest, and we are taking an epic journey through the Malazan series, one chapter at a time. We try to do that every week. These last few chapters have been pretty big, a lot to digest, and so it's been like once every 2 weeks we've been able to get together and talk about it. But it is a marathon, not a sprint. So we are just starting. We're a few chapters into book 4, though we haven't dropped our first episode yet of book 4. That'll be coming probably this weekend, I think is what Justin told me.
Longtime viewers of our show, you know already, I'm a huge fan now of Malazan. I've read all 10 books, and there are review episodes out of all of those, and I've gotten through the 6 books by Ian C. Esselmont, Novels of the Malazan Empire. That 6th review will be coming to you soon. I was writing prep notes just before I got on here with Derek today, so it's coming. Okay, but we won't talk about any of that right now because, well, Derek's first-time reader, and I want to have him not spoiled in any way, shape, or form. Malazan is too good to spoil. It's too epic. There you go. It's epic. Your epic quest, it's epic fantasy. It's amazing.
It is. Sometimes it feels like we bit off way more than we can chew, but we're getting there.
There you go. That's a great turn of phrase you just had. Biting off more than you can chew. It can feel like that sometimes when you're a reader of speculative fiction, fantasy, science fiction, horror, all the different subgenres. There's so much goodness out there waiting for us to read. I've been a real heavy reader since I was a kid. This is not something I came to later in life. I've always read a lot, but I didn't always read in a very organized manner. And I found, since I started doing this show, that there was a lot of great content I missed over the years. I just never heard about these books, or maybe I heard about them, but I didn't remember I heard about them. That's where having a TBR can be helpful. I've been using a TBR for about 4 years, at least 3 years now. You're just getting started with that sort of thing. Am I right?
Yep, it was actually you that kind of prompted me to do it because I saw something on Twitter. You know, I messaged you. I don't know what it was, 2 weeks ago or whatever, and I can't remember what it was. But I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to sit down and do this. I've thought about it. I don't know why I was dragging my feet about it, and maybe it's just because I didn't really know how I wanted to do it. And then I just went for it, took the plunge. So I think it'll be a good thing.
So a TBR, the to be read list, can look a lot of different ways. You've been able to look at mine. I've been able to look at yours. They are very different in structure, very different in
Yes.
style, and that's fine. A TBR needs to be what will most help the reader and that reader's preferences. There's not a right way to do a TBR. We're going to talk about the kinds of things people should think about when they're creating a TBR, but we're not going to be prescriptive here. People can do it the way they want. What's most important is that they understand why they're doing it. So you just recently did it, and you said it partly came from something I'd put on Twitter and all, but what is its purpose for you? Why have a list of things that you want to read?
For me, and I'm sure you're probably the same way, these books, they seem to add up quicker than they're removed from a list.
Oh,
So,
amen.
yeah. And I've kind of kept, I guess, a mental list of, okay, well, especially more so with like the indie books than like the traditional
Mhm.
published books that I have, but because I feel like I kind of owe it to myself and the author that I want to try to read these in the order that I get them. To be fair, it's just like an internal feeling. I don't know why I feel that way because, I get this book and I'm going to be excited to read it when I get it. And just, the nature of our own show, we don't go through things very fast. Right now I'm reading 2 books. And so, when I'm not reading Malazan, I'm reading something else. And I want to try to get through those in the order that I bought them because most of the time, I'm tagging the author on Twitter. Hey, I just bought your book, posting
Sure.
pictures and that type of thing. And
Yep.
my goal would be, when I finish that book, as long as the author's open to it, I'd love to chat with them about it. So that's where that feeling comes from. Like, okay, I got to have an order to this, and I want to try to do it in the order that I bought them. Now, is my list that I've created probably 100% perfect or accurate to that? I don't think so, since I've been going off recollection. It's just kind of, I guess my style is the only way I can word it. That's just kind of how I want to do things.
So putting books in a certain order to match your style is what you're using your TBR for. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I have a TBR list that's more of a WTBR, a wish to be read, because I will never read all the books on my TBR. I just added a few more today. There are currently 1,518 books on my to be read list. I could quit my job and do nothing all day but read books and still not get through all these before I die. I'm pretty sure. Especially since I'd still keep adding more. What good is it doing me? Well, I'm able to plan ahead. What am I going to read next? And I do mine. Well, I don't want to get ahead on the particulars and how we craft these, but I'm able to always know what's coming up in my reading list, and I can move things around. I am not a chain to it as a slave. I have control of my TBR. I decide which order I'm going to read things, and if I decide I want to go out of order, I can go out of order when I have all these books to look at on this beautiful list. What's most important for me with my TBR is I never forget something, because I come upon so many recommendations, so many great books other people are reading, and I want to capture that. And someday I might read them if they're on my TBR. If not, I'm old. I'm going to forget. It's just going to leak out the brain. So the
well,
TBR
especially if you
keeps
get
more and more.
1,800 books or however many it was, yeah, you can't remember all of them.
Now, my TBR has really helped me enjoy the reading experience a lot more because I'm able to kind of plot out a variety of genres, a variety of styles, and make sure my reading never gets too one note. You mentioned indie authors and traditional publishing. I will interweave those things, and I've got it planned out that way. I've got a number of books. Let's see, some of them are behind me. That corner right there are all books authors sent me to try to read, and they're on my TBR. I will get to them, and I do kind of do the same thing as you. I read them in the order that I receive them. Once in a while, something might jump the list if it's just so amazing. And then there are occasional TBR busters, like book 5 of Stormlight Archive is coming out December 6th. Then everything else gets moved out of the way, and I'm reading that book. There's occasional books that are like that, but most have to wait their turn. they'll never necessarily wait their entire turn. When I add a book to the list, it never goes at the end. It goes somewhere in the midst of other books that I want to read based on how I feel at the time.
Sure.
Let's talk about when you're building your TBR. You build it in a way that's going to be useful to you, that's going to make your reading more enjoyable. What are the kinds of books that you put on your TBR? What sort of things are you wanting to read, Derek, that's going to go there?
Well, so for me, when I sat down and did this, it only made sense that I have two different lists. I would say probably 9 out of every 10 books I buy right now is an indie book. And if I'm buying a traditionally published book, then I'm probably getting it at our local secondhand bookstore or
Okay.
off like Thrift Book, something like that.
Yeah.
And the indie books are, even though like our show isn't, Malzahns traditionally published, and that's our main focus, I want to read as many indie books as I can. So that's what I worked on first.
Okay.
The books that I have on my list are books that I physically have. If I don't have it, it's not on my list.
Ah, okay. See, I do not have all 1,500 of my books at this point. On my list, I have two different ways that I track them. I have them in italics. So it's italicized if I already own it. And if it's in regular print, that's one I will get when I get to it. I read in 3 different ways, and I'm always reading 3 different things at the same time because I'm reading something physically, I'm reading something digitally on a Kindle app, and then I'm reading something with my ears. I always have an audiobook that I'm going through at the same time. All of those are just blended together on the TBR. But that's how certain things will move around because there's some books I'm not going to do by listening. I want to actually see it with my eyes and process it different. And there's others that are easy listening, and I will definitely do those on audio. And most of the indie books I do as physical copies because they'll send me the book. Okay, now I will read that book.
Right.
But I don't highlight those any differently on my TBR. That's where it's just in my head. I know which kind of style I'm going to try to do. Now, you mentioned you've got indie and you've got traditional publishing, but what about genres? What sort of genres do you include on here? Is it everything and anything? I mean, mine is fantasy, science fiction, and horror with some subgenres highlighted there. I mean, I've got plenty of grimdark because I definitely enjoy that. What about you?
Yeah, most of my stuff is fantasy. I might have a few sci-fi books in there, mostly fantasy and the different subgenres from there, whether that's indie or traditionally published.
Are there any particular authors that have helped shape your TBR? Certain authors you keep making sure you put more on?
Indie or traditional?
Either. It's a great time to shout out an indie author. Feel free.
Sure. H.C. Newell is still working. She's been doing some rewrites, or I guess I don't know if that's the right word, but she like reworked her first book and added like 60,000 words to it.
Nice. Because she's still on my TBR. I haven't got to it yet. So it's going to be even better when I get there.
Yeah. I think she's going to re-release it, in print as well. I don't think it's just going to be a digital thing. But we did that book on our show, and we did 2 chapters at a time with that. And she was on all the episodes except for the very first one. And we're probably going to start the second book sometime after the new year. We just want to get a little ways into House of Chains first.
Sure.
But pretty much like any of the indie author books that I have, their books are going to be, if they put out another book, it's going to be like an instant buy. Maybe not instant, but like, okay, like when I've got the money for it, I'm going to buy that. I'm going to keep supporting them, whether it's the same series or the next one, whatever series. I listened to your episode today about your tournament, which I suppose I'll be coming up here in the next couple of days.
Yes.
The best start to a series. And so the one I'm currently reading, The World Maker Parable in Adjacent Monsters, in that duology of books from Luke Tarzian, I would challenge you to read the first paragraph in that book and tell me that you are not wanting to continue reading. It hit like a ton of bricks, and I was like, whoa, I'm in, I'm sold. I don't know if I don't know how it's not traditionally published. I mean, it's plenty good. I don't know if he just didn't want to go that route, and maybe that's something I'll talk to him about when I finish the book.
Well, I said
Yeah.
I was updating my TBR today too. Those two, that duology is part of what I added. From what you're saying, maybe I need to put it higher now. If it's that good.
Like I said, read the first paragraph, and I mean, I was sold from that, and I was like, again, I've not read everything out there, but I've not read an opening to a book like that. Christopher Brenning, The Hellborn King, was another one on my list, and
Mhm.
I've read all the two novels and then the novella that are out, and I can't wait for book three. That one for me would probably be a TBR buster, as you said earlier. When the third book comes out, aside from our Malazan stuff, I might drop everything to read that
There
because
you
I
go.
enjoyed it that much.
So if somebody's watching this who hasn't created a TBR yet, kind of what we're leaning into here is when you're going to start building your own, think about the authors you enjoy. Put their books on there and watch for more stuff that's going to come out by them because you'll probably want to add them to your TBR. For me, I've got Stephen King books scattered all throughout my TBR because I enjoy him as an author, but I don't want to read nothing but Stephen King. So I've got him scattered through a considerable amount of my TBR because he has been very prolific. I've got other, authors, Joe Abercrombie, scattered about. Now I'm plowing through the rest of his, but they've been waiting on my TBR for a while. But just think of the authors you like. I end up adding whole batches of books when I find an author that I like, and I'm like, what else has he written? What else has she written? I'm going to put it on the list and trust it'll be good. And if I get to it and I don't like it, well, that's a quick way to make my list a little shorter. I'll just remove them later if I need to.
Right. I would say I'm much more, like, I guess, tethered to my indie list, like my traditional published list that I made up. I could see myself bouncing around on that quite a bit more.
Yeah. And that is when I'm saying bouncing around between things, it's really mostly traditional published. Although I have a lot of indie authors on my list that I didn't promise anything. They didn't send me books. I've heard they're good, which is another key to developing your TBR. Find some ways to discover new books. Don't just count on stumbling upon them. Spending time with some online tools like Goodreads or Storygraph, you can get what other people are finding and what they're thinking about books, and you'll find things in the various genres you like just by poking around a bit. Or get together with other people who like books, like on our Discord server, where I get tons of recommendations from the people on our Discord. We have one channel that's just for what you're reading now, and people are commenting on the books they're reading and discovering. And we all do it spoiler light, so we don't ruin it for anybody. But I keep adding more books to my TBR from what others have discovered, and I'm doing the same for them. So find ways you can connect with people. Derek, do you have some other people? I mean, you follow our channel, but do you have other things too that you get good reading tips from?
I mean, just Twitter in general, X, whatever you want to call it. What I've really discovered within like the indie community side of things is that all the authors are so great about supporting each other. So if somebody puts out a new book, and if you follow this author on Twitter, and another author puts out a book, they're probably going to retweet it to help them out. And I've discovered things that way.
Yeah.
And like you, I mean, I've had some books sent to me as well that I'll eventually get to, which I've just been tickled by, because I'm like, I wasn't necessarily looking to have it sent to me. Like, I'm willing to buy it. And they're like, no, no, no. Like, I'm like, well, this is great. And it's just kind of a cool feeling to get that. Michael Roberti is another one. I've read his two books and novella that are out, and he's always retweeting other authors and stuff. They just kind of champion each other, and
Sure.
it's good to see that collaboration, and not so much as like competition, like, oh, they're stealing my readers and trying to tear each other down or something like that.
Two thoughts came to me while you were saying those things. One is, I think we can agree X is a stupid name for a social media platform. Twitter, there was nothing wrong with Twitter. Why change it? Stupid, Elon. Stupid. But the second thing I'll say is, yeah, the self-published indie authors, they do really support each other, build each other up. But I want to give a shout out to Mark Lawrence, because I mean, he's an established, traditional published guy who also is constantly retweeting and promoting indie authors. He's a big supporter of just writers in general. So I already like his books, but I like him even more because he's always recommending and sharing other self-published authors. So yeah,
Yeah,
Mark.
the Spitbow is a pretty cool competition, though I don't feel like I've seen as much hype around it this year as like like last year, I remember being excited about a lot of the books, and not that I've read a lot of them, but maybe it's just because it's around the holidays, things are kind of quiet down. But I think they have all their finalists.
There are always so many more books coming out than we can possibly read. I mean, there's a few booktube content creators that seem every time I turn around, they've read the next new thing. And I'm like, how? How do you do this? Do you just sleep on the book and you wake up in the morning and you remember the summary? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's impossible. I have a job. I have a life, not even that much of a life, which is why I can do a channel, but I still can't read that fast.
Right.
But
Well, and you guys are putting out videos just about every day. So I mean, to fit that in on top of reading and your job, I mean, yeah,
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
lot. So
The other thing that gets in the way of me reading more of the new stuff is I really favor a lot of the classic stuff too that I never got around to. So just because it's now 2024 doesn't mean I don't still want to read some great novels from the 80s that I didn't read back then. That's part of why my TBR is so full. I've got books from the 80s, the 90s, the aughts that are awesome books. Everyone would agree, but I never read them. So I still hope to.
that's an interesting point, and I'm just kind of reflecting on it now that I mean, my indie books are all I mean, that's kind of a new wave thing or newer. It's not been super long. My traditionally published books are older books as well, for the most part. I
Mhm.
hadn't thought about that. That's interesting.
It's another point for people crafting TBRs to keep in mind. How do you organize your TBR? What kind of books do you search for? You might try to balance classic books that you never got to or that you actually want to reread, because there's some real value in a reread sometimes, versus new releases. And trying to have a rich balance can really help your reading experience be enjoyable. Also, some people will thematically group their TBR. Like they'll have all their grimdark books, all their epic fantasy books, all their hard sci-fi books, and they'll have those in order. But when it's time to pick a new book, they kind of think, okay, what do I feel? Which genre do I feel like now? And they'll jump to the next book on that part of the TBR. Whatever works to help you enjoy your reading experience, that's how you use your TBR.
Yeah, I think you're kind of hitting on like people being mood readers and that type of thing, which
Mhm.
I don't. That's not me at all, really. I guess I haven't been able to relate to that side of things. It's just I'm picking a book, I'm reading it. I mean, I'm probably going to get into it, and hopefully I like it, because even if I don't, I still feel like I've got to finish it. Um,
Okay, that leads us well into the next part of this conversation. Where when you have a TBR, whether it's 50 books or 1,500 books, you still want to make sure you're using it well to enhance your reading experience and not letting it overwhelm you. A year or two ago, there was a big thing on social media where people were starting to get rid of their TBRs because of the pressure. It was too much work to have a list to have to read through. And I'm like, well, they were doing it wrong. So, the first thing I would say to anybody when you create a TBR is to, keep some perspective, stay in touch with reality. There are too many books coming out that you're going to want to read. You will not be able to read them all. So just make a list and read what you can and enjoy it. Don't not enjoy reading because of all the things you haven't read yet. That'll just drive you nuts. It's okay not to read everything.
it is, and I know I feel the FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
Right?
Like, oh, well, I'm reading this, but everybody read that like 2 years ago, and now I'm just getting to it. And it was kind of hard to let go of that feeling, like, well, I'm going to enjoy it when I can. Doesn't matter when everybody else read it.
That's it.
It's still here for me now.
I may read a book that was big and everybody was reading it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but it's new to me and I'm going to do a review episode on it. And people, some are going to enjoy it, the review. They're going to watch it because they remembered how much they love that book. But there are a lot of people like me who haven't read that one yet. Doesn't matter how long it was out. So that's the thing to remember with all of these books. We're all coming to them at different times and at different points in our lives. And when we have different amounts of time to read, there's value in all the books and enjoying them when you get to them, and don't sweat the ones you can't fit in. But because you can't read them all, a TBR can help you prioritize. Decide which things are going to be higher on your list. This is where you said mood reading before. This is where mood reading can partner with a TBR because you can have your plan laid out, the books you're going to read. I'm going to do an episode not too long from now of the books I plan to read in 2025. I did one for 2024. I've read many of those books, but not all of them. And I've read some books that I hadn't planned because your mood shifts. Okay, there will be books you discover that you didn't know when you were making your TBR, and you're going to stick some of them in high and want to read them soon. But there will be other books that maybe were farther down your list that you'll learn more things about, or others will talk to you about them, and so you want to raise them higher on your TBR. You control the TBR, so feel free to move things around. Now, if you just can't do that, if you have peace in rigid order, then do that. It's Derek, I sense from you really like to have the order and stick with the order, especially the indie ones. So to jump out of order would be disturbing and stressful.
I don't know that I'd say disturbing, but I would probably just feel, like I said before, just kind of that guilt, like, well, and I mean, the authors don't really know what order I got them in for the most part, right? But it's just kind of like, well, I got this book first. I should really read this one first, versus whatever one. But that's where I feel, I guess, I don't know that I want to say pressure to do that, but just, I guess, self-inflicted pressure, right? I mean, that's really what it is.
Totally. One of those I can highlight here. I got to reach down. I'm going to give a shout out to Leslie Shu and her Kumasagi series. I'm reading this book right now, but I've been reading this book for months now because it's good, but other things I've been reading have sucked me in more. So I feel bad that I'm not getting through this as fast as I could. I mean, it's not very long. See, it's not a big book. I'm halfway through now. It's been worth my time. Every chapter I read, I enjoy, but it sits sometimes for a week without me touching it while I'm reading a couple other things. That's just how it goes sometimes. The books don't control us. We control what we feel like reading. But Leslie, it's still awesome. I will finish it. And she sent me all 4 books in her series. So it may take me forever to get through them. But at this point, with the first book, I'm feeling like, yes, I do want to read the rest. I'll get there.
Well, that's a good thing then.
Yes, but it leads me to the next part of understanding how a TBR works. Just because it's on your list doesn't mean you will enjoy it, nor does it mean you have a commitment to have to finish it. The DNF debate. I struggle to not finish something I start. I mean, I'm a completionist. I like to start something and go all the way to the end. But if you're reading something and it's just not hitting for you, it's okay to let it go. Derek, are you good with letting go?
I've not done it yet.
You complete books.
Yeah, I guess my hot take on that, I'm going to use Sun Eater as it.
Okay.
I picked it up from Silverstone's books when he was still around, because he was going to do a read along on Discord or whatever. I'm like, okay, well, there's a lot of hype around this. I like sci-fi stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it comes down to it just wasn't for me. I don't know if you've read it or not.
Not yet. It's on my TBR.
And maybe you'll love it. Maybe you'll love it. And that's, I dreaded reading it. I mean, it's a beautifully written book, I will say that. But it just didn't connect with me. And if I had the other books on my list, if I had created a list at that point, they would have came off. I got through the first book just to give it that shot that, okay, maybe as I go, it's going to turn on me. I'll enjoy it. But I just never got that. And so I just let it go.
Now, with the massive TBR I have, this is where I'll highlight part of how things move up and down. Every time I talk to someone else about books, if they're talking about their feelings on something that's on my TBR, they love it, I move it up a little higher. If they don't, I move it down a little. So Sun Eater just dropped a few slots.
Well,
and that's part of the fun I have with my TBR when I have this many books.
I'm probably in the minority with that opinion on that. So, I mean,
No. You're not necessarily. Well, I don't know. Maybe you are, but I first heard about the Sun Eater series from Spencer over at the Fantasy Files podcast, and he loved the first book and he's raving about it. And I don't think he finished the series because he
oh,
ran
really?
into
Hmm.
it wasn't all that he found at the beginning, if I
That's
remember correctly.
interesting because I've heard people say that, well, I don't know how old he was when he wrote the first one, but apparently, he was pretty young. And people say from there on, book two, I don't even remember how many are in the series now, if it's or if he's even got it all the way done yet, but that it just gets better from there.
Really?
I
Okay.
just
Well,
that's what I've heard from a lot of people. So
all of this is so subjective. If you're reading a book and you're just not getting into it, it's okay to set it down. If you would feel too bad about not giving it enough of a chance, okay, finish the book. But if there's a series, you don't have to read the rest of the series. That's what you were saying, Derek. You
yeah,
can
that's
stop.
my
You can
style.
stop. The one thing I will say is if you are going to give a review of a book, whether it's just writing on Amazon or Goodreads, or if you're a content creator and you're going to do an episode, do not do a review on a book you didn't finish. That just sucks. Okay. You don't know what you're talking about because you didn't finish the book. You can share your opinion with people. The book didn't work for me, blah, blah, blah. But you can't speak with any authority if you didn't take the time to finish the book. This is why I, with authority, will bash The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, because I suffered through the whole 4-book series and hated it. I read it because others said it was so good. And I'm like, I'm going to keep going because maybe I'll get there. And
You just tortured yourself.
I did. I kind of want those weeks back. Now, truth in advertising. The Book of the New Sun is a classic of science fiction fantasy. It is beautifully written. It is a work of art, but I didn't enjoy it. And that can be two things true at the same time.
Sure.
There's nothing bad about the book. It's just not for me. All right, one last thing about managing the TBR. I want to talk about some of the technology you can use. You've crafted your TBR as a Google Doc, okay? And it's all there in 2 sections, right? You have 2 different parts to it. Tell us
Yep.
about that.
So I've got my indie list, and that one I did first. And then actually, I guess there's a couple more parts than that because I decided I was going to list the books that I've already read as well. And I'll probably continue to add to that as I finish books, subtract from the waiting to be read part to the completed part. We're going to be doing our Malazan stuff for years yet. So I didn't even bother with that. But I've got, I guess, like a on deck circle
Yeah.
for Justin and I, our podcast, because we're going to continue along with HC's books. So Forbidden Realms will be next with that. Then I've got my indie list, and then below that I've got my traditionally published list after that, which that was just kind of me looking at my bookshelf, kind of going through things, and all right, well, actually, like not too long ago, I had on our Patreon and on our Twitter, I had like a little poll with 3 different books that I would consider reading next. The one I was hoping to read next didn't win on that, so which is fine. I would have been happy with any one of the 3, but the one I wanted most didn't come away with the vote. So I'll stick to it, and I'm going to read the Cold Fire trilogy next, which I think is an older series.
Oh yeah, I read it long time ago. C.S. Friedman.
Yes.
And I think you'll enjoy it. Yeah.
That's at the top of my traditionally published list, and then I'd have to scroll down and look here. I don't remember after that, but that was more just kind of like looking through my shelf. Okay. And then the stuff that I've read before that would be rereads for me, that stuff's lower on the list. And I think the very last thing I have on there is Realm of the Elderlings, because Justin and I have loosely talked about maybe someday when we finish Malazan, we'll do that next. So that could come up higher potentially.
Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderling books are high on my TBR now. I spent a couple of years bashing Robin Hobb's books because I've read the second trilogy of that series, the Live Ship Traders trilogy, and I didn't like it. I think my problem was I wasn't ready for it. It wasn't what I was expecting. And it was also the second trilogy in the series. I didn't read the first. Now, they're not directly connected. They're just part of the same realm of the Elderlings, but still, I think I need to give Robin Hobb another chance. So that's all going to happen in 2025 for me. So it's on there now. But for the longest time, you would not find Robin Hobb anywhere on my TBR. But no, yep.
I do remember hearing you. I guess I don't know that I would say bash, but you weren't real excited about it, from what I remember.
And we can change our minds. This is okay. I want to give you kudos for having a section on your TBR for Kickstarters that haven't been delivered yet.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Oh, that's a cool thing to have on there. Books, authors that you've supported as they're trying to get out their first book or their next book. And you know it'll come eventually, but good on you. I've only done one Kickstarter. I threw money like half of America to Brandon Sanderson for his secret novels, his 4 novels back during COVID, which were all quite entertaining.
I haven't read any of those yet. I've listened to the first 3 books of the Stormlight Archive on audiobook. I haven't physically read those books or any of the others in the universe yet, but they're on my list too.
Well, that's a whole nother episode we could talk about there, but all those Cosmere books, they're all so interconnected. I've read all of them now. The Stormlight Archive books I've read twice, and it really helps you to make connections if you've read the other stuff and then read Stormlight Archive. But again, that's a whole nother episode.
That's I've seen like an ultimate reading order for those, and I would be more interested in doing it that way, because that's how Justin and I are doing Malazan as well. Sure. Just kind of everything sprinkled, just so you get the full effect. You get all of it.
Now, when I look at your TBR, again, you've done it just basically as a word processing document, but you boldly numbered everything on the list, which implies this is the order I shall read these books when I choose from these lists. You don't have to. You can change your mind, but if you move something, you have to fix all the numbers. That's like,
Yeah, I didn't think about that. And after looking at yours, I kind of thought, well, maybe an Excel document wouldn't be that bad.
And that's it. I use a spreadsheet because it is so easy to rearrange. I can move things up. I can move whole sections, like a 5-book series that I suddenly want to move up 100 higher on my TBR. I just grab them all. Whoop. So I get to play with my TBR very easily because it's on a spreadsheet. But what I don't do that you're doing on your TBR, and I've seen some other people do this, is I don't track things I've already read. I shove those to Goodreads. So a lot of you watching, that I have an active Goodreads account. You can see anything I've read before on Goodreads, but it disappears from my TBR. I take great relish every time I finish a book, and poof, that one's gone.
But you've already added 10 or 20 more, so it's...
Well, yeah, I never get ahead. Never.
Yeah, negative gains, I guess. So.
Now, fantasy, science fiction, and horror are the prominent things on my TBR. You said fantasy more for yours. Each genre does come with some challenges that are specific to that genre when you're trying to have them in your TBR and spend time reading them. They also come with specific joys. I want to talk just a little bit about each of these genres very briefly, but fantasy. What is one of the problems with trying to read a lot of fantasy, have a lot of fantasy on your TBR? Can you think of anything that comes to mind for you?
Just maybe that you're going to run into stuff that's too similar. Depending on what you have on there, I suppose you might not have a lot of variety. There is a lot of variety, but you might be kind of just narrowed in on one specific part.
That's where you may need to diversify a little more. If it's starting to sound a little one note, there's only so many tropes authors can use. You might need to put a few different types of things in there. That's one of the things I love about grimdark fantasy, because we didn't have grimdark until about 20 years ago, and it's been picking up over the years. It gives a very different flavor. Urban fantasy did the same thing, pretty much just here in the 2000s. It's not all epic and high fantasy anymore. There's so many different types and styles that you can find now. So interspersing those helps. Another thing that some people will find they run into is series fatigue. I'm a big Wheel of Time fan. You enjoy Wheel of Time as well.
Absolutely.
That's one of the issues some people have with the Wheel of Time is it's 14 books plus a prequel. It's too much. They're like, I can't read something that long. It's like, well, don't try to read it all at once. Put some things in between books. Sometimes we call those palate cleansers. Just throw in a one-off novel that will just be something completely different and fun, and then jump back in. Obviously, Malazan Book of the Fallen has the same issue. It can be a lot for someone to try to read all 10 books straight from beginning to end. I
Oh
didn't.
yeah.
I interspersed other books. You guys are interspersing some books there. I mean, you are taking a break at times from reading those chapters, right? You're occasionally focusing on a different book that you're doing something, or are you still reading Malazan at the same time?
When we did HC's first book, we would, depending on her schedule, we kind of went every other week. So one week we'd be reading Malazan, the next week
Yeah.
we'd be reading Curse of the Fallen, and
So you're breaking
uh,
it up a little.
yeah. And
Because
when we get to her second book, we'll probably do the same thing. We're not going to fully pause on Malazan. We'll just intermingle.
yeah, there's so much richness in fantasy fiction, but sometimes it can actually be too much richness. Another issue people will get into if they're reading nothing but fantasy is keeping up with all the sprawling worlds and the lore heavy plots. And I mean, Wheel of Time is like that. That's why I've reread it so many times, because you forget details from before that are now relevant to later books. There's so much to it. That can be why you don't maybe want to read only fantasy. It can start to get a little too brain heavy. You haven't read a lot of E.N.C. Esselmont yet. You have read some, right? Or have you only read Stephen Erickson stuff?
Just Erickson stuff so far.
Okay.
I think Justin keeps track of that side of things. I think we'll get through House of Chains, and then we might do one of the novellas after that before Midnight Tides. I don't remember the order exactly on that. But then, yeah, I think I'd have to research it and look it again.
I know you'll be reading, if you're following these things in the order that makes sense, you'll get to his first one, Knight of Knives, like after book 6, I think.
Well, maybe, okay. Yeah, I think that sounds right.
It might be after book 5. Maybe it's
Somewhere
after
there, though.
4. I don't know, but it's somewhere coming in here. But what I found with Esselmont is, I humorously say, Erickson made my brain bleed a little bit. Esselmont is a breath of fresh air. It's just as rich, but his writing is just not as dense. I could go through it and not be sweating when I'm done. It's like I didn't have to work so hard. And I
Have
really
you
enjoyed
read
that.
the Bauchlane and Corbel Broach novels yet?
Yes,
Yeah.
those were delightful.
So yeah, when we did that one, it's exactly, to me, and I think Justin felt similarly. It was, yeah, kind of that relief, that breath of fresh air to not have something so heavy and
Right.
yeah, make your brain bleed.
Not that I have an issue with the heavy stuff. I loved that heavy epic fantasy work, but it's exhausting if that's all you're reading.
Yeah, you need a break sometimes.
Science fiction, same sort of thing. When I add science fiction to my TBR, I'm thinking of, some of them are hard science fiction and some are more like science fiction fantasy. It's much softer. It's just fun. The science is not rigid. You don't have to worry about physics sometimes, and having a variety of styles, that's good. Like, I've got some things coming up on my TBR that really people struggle with, like the Hyperion Quartet. I'll be getting to that soon. Zach has read them, and he was like, "Well, the first couple are good, and the last two, I'm not sure I should have spent time on." But I'm going to try them, But they're harder science fiction. Other things are more Star Wars style. They're a little mushier, and having variety, that helps a TBR again. If you get into horror for your TBR, that's not really your thing. I don't see horror on your list here. I don't read a lot of horror, but a little bit. If people are going to put horror on their TBR, think about what kind of horror you enjoy. I've got some of Stephen King's horror novels, but they're more psychological horror, really, a lot of it. Some of it, some supernatural, but not necessarily real life, and you'll need therapy after you read it horror. I don't need that in my life. So you pick the style of stuff you want. But having a diverse TBR for me keeps all the reading really fresh, and I recommend that.
Yeah, I think the closest I get to horror is probably blended with the sci-fi or the alien novels that I've read, and I've read all of them that I have now. I've got the big, thick, giant Marvel collection of all the comics.
Okay.
I mean, they're like I don't know, the book must weigh 10 pounds a piece. I mean, they're massive. So that's something I would read at home and not take with me, I don't think, because it's just not really realistic. But I mean,
There you go. Yep.
yeah.
I am about to start a rewatch of the Alien films because Alien Romulus is now available, which I have not seen.
Ooh,
But I can stream it
okay.
now. So I'm going to start from
I
the beginning and watch them all. Probably not Alien versus Predator, but the other ones, and the flow right into Alien Romulus.
Okay. So I did not like Romulus the first time I saw it. The second
Oh,
time I saw it, I liked it a lot more. I was able to get over the problems that I had
okay.
from the
Okay.
first one. Yeah, Alien, totally my jam. If you want to talk about Alien movies after you watch them, hit me up. I'd love to.
Now, what I'm busy with right now is doing a Terminator rewatch. 2 nights ago, I watched Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Last night, it was Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. Tonight, Terminator Salvation, because I realized the final one that came out, Terminator Dark Fate, I never watched.
I
When
haven't
it,
seen that one either.
when that hit me, I'm like, I got to watch that. But I think we'll start over.
For what I remember, I liked Salvation. I thought it was pretty good.
Okay.
It's been a long time, but
Yeah.
yeah, the third one, I don't remember much of that. And yeah, I haven't. How many are there Terminator movies?
There's 6.
Okay, so then I haven't seen the last two.
Terminator Genesis and then Terminator Dark Fate. Those are the 5
Okay,
and 6.
I haven't seen
But
those then.
one of the things I'm realizing as I've been doing the rewatch is how cool it is to see how technology changed. Because, I mean, none of these movies were done back to back. There's a gap of years between each
Sure, yeah,
one. And it's fun to see how that impacts the movie. Plus, just the technology, the real world technology of being able to make movies. They get so much better. It's impressive what they were able to do with the first one in the 80s. I mean, that was ahead of its
yes.
time. Yeah.
I guess important question here. So, are you going to be streaming, like the original movies then, or do you have them physically? Are you watching the theatrical editions, or are you watching special editions?
I'm pretty sure I'm watching theatrical editions. I haven't checked that. I streamed the first two. The third one wasn't available on any of my streaming services, but I own it. So I went and got the disc. Last night we put the DVD in and kind of said, someday we'll have grandkids going, "What is that you're doing there with a thing?"
Yeah.
But I can stream the others. They're all on HBO Max right now.
Oh,
The last
Terminator. I guess I was talking for the
Terminator. Oh,
alien side of
Aliens.
things.
No, I own the first 4. Yeah, I've got a DVD collection, and those are the deluxe extended, not just theatrical release.
So oddly, I'm pretty sure today is the 27th anniversary of when Resurrection came out in theaters.
Really? Huh.
I think, or within the last day or two. If I don't know if you've watched for Alien 3, if you haven't watched the assembly cut, I think that's the better version. It
Okay.
fleshes out some of the characters a little more. That's the way I would go.
So the Terminator movies, my wife is watching with me. They're just action flicks with a sci-fi leaning, and she enjoys the humor as well. Alien movies? No, that's just me. Zach would watch those with me, but not my wife. She's like, no.
I've tried to drag my wife into them too, and she went and saw Romulus with me. Which, I mean, you didn't probably really need to see any of the other ones to watch Romulus, but I mean, it helps. And if you have the second movie fresh in your mind, there's similar beats. I guess I'll
Okay.
say that.
Okay. Once in a while, my wife really impresses me, though. The alien stuff, no, that makes sense that she doesn't want to watch that. But I watched Deadpool and Wolverine the other day, now that it was streaming on Disney Plus. And then I told her I'd watched it, and she's like, "Without me?" And I said, "Oh, I didn't think you'd want to watch it." Her response was, "Wait. You made me watch Deadpool 1 and 2. Yeah, I want to watch the third one now." I had
I
forgotten
haven't
I made her watch the other ones. But
I haven't seen that one yet. My
oh,
wife
it's
is not.
so
She's
good.
not big on Ryan Reynolds, so I'll get to it at some
If
point.
you're a Marvel Comics fan at all, if you're an X-Men fan, if you're a Deadpool fan, I mean, there's just so much goodness in Deadpool and Wolverine. I don't think you even need to watch the first 2 Deadpool movies to enjoy Deadpool and Wolverine.
Okay,
But if you've watched them, you get it even better. Oh, it
sure.
was so good. So good. But that's it. There'll be no more Deadpool movies. I saw on social media someone asked Ryan Reynolds, "So when will we have Deadpool 4?" And he's like, "Oh, no, we won't. My wife will divorce me.
Oh,
My kids will divorce me.
wow.
No more Deadpool movie." I mean, if I considered doing another Deadpool movie and like started working on it, then they'd divorce me and then I would make a Deadpool movie because I have no prenups with any of them. So I'd need the money and I'd make a Deadpool 4 then. But that's the only way it's happening. It was,
Well,
yeah, I mean, he's funny. So,
no, nobody needs that kind of stress in their life. So,
but when you get around to watching Deadpool and Wolverine, you'll understand. You don't need. Zach and I did an episode on it. You don't want a Deadpool 4. Deadpool 3
okay,
leaves it beautiful. That's a perfect spot.
good to know.
But I do hope we get Deadpool in the MCU and other movies, cameos and stuff. That'll be entertaining.
Sure.
One more thing to talk about TBRs before we kind of wrap this up. And I was thinking you can use TBRs not just to lean into the things you think you like, but also to explore some other sorts of things. You know, you can take a chance. You can put things on your TBR that maybe you wouldn't have normally read. I give you an example. I read V.E. Schwab, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I'd heard someone else recommending it. I'm like, that's not really my style. It's fantasy, kind of supernatural fantasy with a romance leaning. Not really where I go usually. But I gave it a shot. I loved it. I was like, I shouldn't love this. I don't know why I like this book, but it was good. So I have more V.E. Schwab now on my TBR that I'll get to eventually. When you take a chance, sometimes it pays off. Indie authors, self-published titles, those are a perfect example. You can put them on your TBR, give them a try. There are some great things out there that aren't getting traditionally published. You find out about them, put them on your TBR. You may have some that are amazing. You may have some that, well, I tried. And that's okay too, you know. What are some of the best surprises you've had in indie publishing? Besides the ones you've said already, are there any others that really stand out for you?
Well, I haven't read too many yet, but
Mm,
I will say I've been all the ones I've read so far. I've been surprised by how good they've all been. I guess I didn't know what to expect because I'd never read an indie book before. I'm pretty sure HC's book was the first one that I did, and I saw her book cover on Twitter.
mhm.
Somebody retweeted it, whatever, and then I followed her, and I've like I got to have this book, and then I just pitched it to Justin. I'm like, hey, you want to do this? And he's like, okay. But I know like those indie authors, and you're talking about Goodreads, all that stuff really helps them out a lot.
Yeah,
Leaving a review, and I think for the most part they appreciate just an honest review. I mean, if you don't think it's 5 stars, don't give them 5 stars. They're just hoping for honest reviews.
yep.
If it's a 3 or 4, give them a 3 or a 4.
I've read quite a few indie authors now, and for the ones that sent me books, I tell them when they offer to send a book, it's like no risk for them. If I don't like the book, I won't do a review. Because just because I didn't like it doesn't mean somebody else won't. I'm not going to bash a book. I have better things to do with my life than to create an episode just to bash something. So if I don't like
Yeah,
it, I don't review it. If I like it, or if it was just okay, I'll do a review on that. And so they know I'm not going to give them bad press. I'll give them good press if I enjoy it. Of all the indie books that people have sent me that I've tried, there's only one that I didn't do a review on. There's so much good stuff out there. The one that I didn't do a review on, I won't mention because I'm not going to bash it, but I
sure.
didn't even finish it. It was just, and I hate DNFing something. So that's how much it wasn't my thing. But
Huh,
somebody
okay.
else may enjoy it. That's the thing.
I think a lot of it is, all these indie books. I mean, so many of them have great cover artwork, and I mean, there's the old saying, don't judge a book by a cover. But I mean, really, you are. What are you doing to set it apart from everything else that's out there? I mean, I've listened to other people. I think John A. Douglas did a video not too long ago where he was talking about some books, and he said, "Oh, well, this one was a cover by. I thought the cover was cool," and I totally get that. I mean, that's you see that, and I don't know about you, but like, I guess I'm obviously younger than you. I'm older than your son, but I was in seventh grade when I started reading Wheel of Time, and it was introduced to me from a friend. And he showed me the cover, and I'm like, and just instantly my brain starts going like, oh, what kind of what is going on here? What can I imagine? What kind of story is going on? Yeah, it's a great cover,
That's
and
right.
that was the one.
Including
And
with, you know what actor that is, right?
Nicolas Cage. I had to think about it. Like, what's his name?
We laugh about that cover. There's so much wrong with that cover, and yet you're right. It still sucks you in. It makes you
It
ask
sucks me in.
questions. You're interested. Yeah,
So that's just kind of the thing. I look at the art and I'm just like, oh man, what is happening in the story? And sometimes you get the covers that don't have anything to do with the story. It happens. I mean, to me, that's not necessarily a knock, but good artwork definitely helps.
totally. Another thing that you might, when you're creating a TBR, experiment with is finding books that are a blend of genres you enjoy. One of the books that comes to mind for me that I read based on a recommendation of another content creator was Heroes Die, book one of The Acts of Cain. And it's a total mashup of science fiction and fantasy.
Hmm.
And
I did listen to your episodes.
it's so good. And it's a 4-book series. I've read the whole thing now. Zach did too. He read them first. Mind-blowingly good. So good that I'm shocked I don't hear about these books from other people so much. I don't understand that. But again, it's not fantasy, it's not science fiction. It's both meshed together. So finding some of those genre mashups is very cool. A sci-fi horror mashup that turned into a great movie is Annihilation. Have you read or seen the movie
I've
Annihilation?
heard great things about the movie. I did not know it was a book. Haven't read it or seen it yet.
Mashing up the various different genres is something that, toss some books like that on your TBR. You might be pleasantly surprised. The other thing to note is that we haven't said it, and we've talked about a lot of books, but another thing that can end up on your TBR is graphic novels. I think you said something about graphic novels earlier with something we were talking about. What was it that
I,
you referenced?
I've got my Alien comics and the big
That's right.
Marvel
That's right.
collections. Yeah, I've got 4 of them, and then I've got the Fire and Stone, or is it Fire and Blood? I don't remember. There's 2 other side sets or whatever. I don't know how they would be defined, but I've got a boatload of Alien comics to read.
There you go. Graphic novels totally count as fiction, as literature to read, even though they have pictures. There's still a lot of words involved. Some
Oh
of
yeah,
them lean more heavily into the comic style. Others are a little more wordy, but it doesn't matter. Graphic novels still, they're a great thing to add. The Walking Dead is a graphic novel series that I've read the entirety of, and it was amazing. I did that before I watched the entire TV series is based on it. The comics are better. The graphic novel set is just amazing. Yeah, so those count. Put those on your TBR too. It's another piece of variety to mix it up.
for sure.
All right, let's wrap this up. We've talked about TBR a lot. You're just getting started. I've been using mine for years now. There are books on my TBR that were on it when I first created it, and they're still buried at the bottom, and probably always will be. But the fact that they're there means somebody told me about them and I valued them. And maybe one day I'll be in a mood, they'll jump up to the top. The only worse place to be as a book than at the bottom of my TBR is not on my TBR.
I thought
So,
that's what you were going to say.
there's hope. What is at the top of your TBR? Give us the next 5 things that you think you're going to read.
So I'm reading the Adjacent Monster books. I've got his next 2 books at the top of my indie list there, Vultures, and then House of Mirror, which is not out yet, but comes out in like a few weeks.
Okay.
I don't necessarily know that I will jump right into those when I finish Adjacent Monsters.
Because they're a
If I don't,
different series.
they're all in the same world, I
Okay.
believe.
But
I
Adjacent
guess
Monsters is a duology, and these aren't part
yes,
of that duology.
not part of the duology, but I believe set in the same universe.
Okay.
If I don't go right into those, I've got The Advent of Winter, which is a Kickstarter book that I got. I think you can just probably buy it now. I don't know if it's on Amazon or where, but which is like there's just 24 short stories from 24 different authors. I didn't get to it last year. Well, I didn't get it till like March. It took a while to get. Beautiful looking book. After that, I've got Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson. And then his second book, if I don't read those back to back, then I've got a standalone Heliotrope by Palmer Pickering. And she was kind enough to send me that book. She had some extra books in her closet or wherever, and was giving them away. So I was lucky enough to snag one of those from her. On my, I guess, traditional books list, I've got The Black Sun Rising, or the Coldfire trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
The Rhapsody or the Symphony of Ages. That was the one I really wanted to read next. I always thought I remember seeing those covers in like high school. I'm like, man, that looks really cool. And I just never read it. And then I've got The Blade Itself, First Law.
Yes.
Not dabbled into that yet. So that one I had to put pretty high. So
good. Coming up on mine, I'm still finishing the Kumasagi series that I talked about before by Leslie Shue. I'm reading right now Red Country by Joe Abercrombie, but that's the final of the standalone novels. So you've got the First Law trilogy that he wrote, which you just talked about. Then there's 3 standalone novels that aren't really standalone novels. They just aren't as tightly connected as one story. They're 3 separate stories, but they flow together. And then there's a final trilogy. So that's the next thing on my TBR. That final trilogy, The Age of Madness. I'll be moving into that soon. Then I'm reading a long zombie apocalypse series right now called Surviving the Evacuation, which I'm very much enjoying, based in Britain. And I'm reading book 7 right now, but there's a whole bunch more. So I'm going to keep reading those. But see, that only counts as 2 things on my TBR now. Okay, the First Law, finish that. Finish Surviving the Evacuation. Then I have Wind and Truth, book 5 of the Stormlight Archive, obviously, is about to hit big. Then I have Gone But Not Forgotten by Iseult Murphy. That's an independent author that sent me something. I'm going to check that out. And I also have, I'm going to squeeze in 2 more, For a Few Days More by Z.B. Steele and The Black Crown by John A. Douglas, which you mentioned earlier. So those are waiting in there. But I am also going to, in the midst of all that, jump into more Malazan. Having finished novels of the Malazan Empire, the next is to start the Carcanus trilogy. Here we go.
We got a little ways to go to get there. And this is on top of you doing your real-time stuff, too, as well, I imagine.
Yeah, man, I have to admit, we haven't done another section of A Crown of Swords, which is still up there, in a while now, because we've just been so stuck in the other things we're reading. And we've read all of the Wheel of Time stuff, but it's waiting. We'll get back and do another section of that eventually. So, yeah, lots of stuff on the TBR, lots of things to enjoy. And viewers, if you create a TBR, that's what it's all about. Finding ways to connect with more things that you will enjoy, and to never have that moment in time where you finish a book and go, I have no idea what to read. Just take that out of your life. Create a TBR. You'll know what's next. It might be one of 3 things, but at least you'll have choices right there and not just be stuck. Life is too short to be stuck.
Find a good book.
Yes. So at this point, I want to encourage you, viewers, if you have tips for creating a TBR, things you've done with a TBR that Derek and I didn't mention, put them in the comment box. Let's hear your ideas and things that you would suggest for using a TBR, for benefiting from a TBR. Heck, if you think TBRs are garbage and you would never use it in your life, I'll take that opinion too. Put anything you want to say down in that comment box, because we just love to hear the thoughts of our viewers. And while you're doing that, don't forget, like I said before, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, catch our other episodes. Speaking of other episodes, Derek, what do you have coming up now that they might find if they go to your channel?
You're going to find all our Malazan stuff, our latest episode at this particular moment, unless Justin has published something is our second episode of Blood Follows, the first Bauschlein and Corporal Broach episode.
Oh, that's a good one.
It was a lot of fun. We've got a little teaser coming out for House of Chains. Basically, I just read the back of the book for fun. That should be coming out here pretty quick. Might be out now. But our first episode on House of Chains will be going out to our patrons. I think this weekend is Justin's plan, and then everywhere else probably beginning of next week. We had a lot of fun. If you want another Malazan podcast, Jim, we talked with the Malazan Brotherhood, who we had not talked to before.
Okay.
They were a ton of fun. Horse Frog Productions, I think, is how I found them on Spotify.
Okay.
They're on Twitter also. I think they'll be definitely back on our show down the line. Great couple guys, a lot of fun, very knowledgeable. They've read the series 4 times. So
that's mind blowing. I mean, I know you'd get more reading it again, but honestly, I don't think I'm going to reread Malazan because there's so much else I still need to read. But I can read it once, and then I can listen to content about it, and that's like a reread, right?
That's what I've been doing. I've started listening to their stuff, and I'm 4 or 5 episodes in, and it's a lot of fun to go back through that first book as we're now in the 4th book. It's a good time.
There it is. Yeah. So if people want to find your content, where do they find your epic quest?
You can find us on YouTube. Search us up, D&J Epic Quest. We're on Twitter. I made a Blue Sky also, not super active there, but it's there. Twitter's probably the biggest spot. So YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, we're there. Again, that's usually just me doom scrolling through stupid videos, but we do post stuff occasionally as well.
Okay. They're doing great content on their channel. So if you're going to try Malazan, first time reader, haven't done it yet, check them out as you do it. You'll get a lot more, a ton more out of your experience as you read along. But if you read too fast, then you'll have to slow down and do it with them. All right, Derek, thanks for coming out and talking about TBRs today. This has been fun. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. It was great talking with you. Can't wait to do it again.
For sure. Do you have snow yet?
Nope. Well, we did. We got a dusting like last week, but it's gone. Nothing that stuck. So
there you go. Until deer season, nobody wants snow. Once it's time to shoot deer, then they want snow.
Yeah, I think in our part of the state, deer season I think is done. I don't deer hunt. I don't want to. I'm not interested in cleaning a big animal like that. So
deer season in Wisconsin, where I spend time as a high schooler, it's right now, this week, deer season, and they always wanted snow.
Yeah,
and half the kids weren't in school. I was not a deer hunter. I'm a venison eater, but I'm not a deer hunter.
Oh yeah, I like eating it. I don't think I could do it. I've hit a couple deer with my vehicles, and I feel guilty enough about that. So.
And they get your revenge on the vehicle when you hit them.
Yeah, they do.
That's not good.
No.
All right. Well, there you go, everybody. One more tangent we threw at you just to add a little richness to an episode. But thanks for being with us for today. That's where we'll leave you. We'll talk to you next time.